The Nation of Islam started in the summer of 1930 with a man named Fard Muhammad. He preached of a true religion, one that dark-skinned people around the world had already been practicing for centuries, Islam. He vanished mysteriously in 1934, but by then he had already converted 8,000 African Americans to his branch of Islam, and left behind a prodigy named Elijah Muhammad. The nation continued to thrive under Elijah Muhammad's leadership and the motto, "Do for Self," which represented the goals of economic independence and cultural identity for blacks. Muhammad believed that the white man was devil by nature, and expressed a desire to create a separate black nation, mere decades before the civil rights movement brought black-white relations to a head. The nation was preaching redemption, but they were sitting on the cusp of one of the greatest American conflicts in the 20th century. Before that, though, one of the most important figures of the history of the nation had to rise to prominence. In 1946, a 21-year-old man named Malcolm Little was sentenced to 10 years in prison for burglary. It was there that he learned of the Nation of Islam. When he was released from prison in 1952, he immediately went to work for Elijah Muhammad in Detroit. Within a year, he had become the assistant minister to the nation's only temple, and had dropped his slave name of Little in favor of his new moniker Malcolm X. His passion was so deep and his speeches were so fiery that by 1954, a mere 2 years after his release from prison, he had managed to create the nation's second and third temples in Boston and Philadelphia almost single-handedly. During the next 9 years, rumbles of what eventually became the civil rights movement began to appear. Martin Luther King Jr. was preaching nonviolent protests to black communities throughout America, a policy which directly contradicted X's belief, as well as the Nation of Islam's, that black people should seize self-determination by any means necessary. The dichotomy between King and X is very important when looking at the civil rights movement. In some ways, X actually gave a more honest portrayal of black America in the 1960s than King did, but X's radicalism scared white activists away, whereas King's softer approach drew them in. The motto, "by any means necessary," scared white communities across America, to the point that they either tuned X out or fought back, which did more to hurt the movement than to help it. King's willingness to compromise is what set him apart from X, and it shows just how reluctant this nation was to move forward at the time. This continued until 1963, when X went on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land of Mecca. In the March of 1964, X left the Nation of Islam to create his own groups, Muslim Mosque Incorporated and the Organization for Afro-American Unity. His travels had deconstructed his sense of black isolationism, and he was filled with a renewed vigor. He had all the same fiery passion, but he came back a wiser and more considerate man than before. This shows in his famous speech given in April 1964, "The Ballot or the Bullet."
The Russian Revolution was bloody. Chinese Revolution was bloody. French Revolution was bloody. Cuban Revolution was bloody. And there was nothing more bloody than the American Revolution. But today, this country can become involved in a revolution that won't take bloodshed. All she's got to do is give the black man in this country everything that's doing. Everything.
Less than a year later, on February 14th, 1965, Malcolm X's home was firebombed. A week later, 3 men shot Malcolm X 16 times as he was giving a lecture in Harlem. In a bitter twist of fate, it was not some radical racist Jim Crow fanatic who killed X, but rather 3 members from the Nation of Islam, who thought that X's new goals betrayed his more radical past. One nurse from the audience describes the event. "I rushed to the stage even while the firing was going on," she said. "I don't know how I got on the stage, but I threw myself down on who I thought was Malcolm, but it wasn't. I was willing to die for the man. I would have taken the bullets myself. Then I saw Malcolm and the firing stopped, and I tried to give him artificial respiration. I think he was dead then." During X's lifetime, he and the Nation of Islam had a profound impact on the civil rights movement. Sometimes he is portrayed as the devil on the black community's shoulder compared to Martin Luther King's angel, but this is untrue. He and King together crafted a voice for black America, one that was complex and left room for both outrage and compromise. The Nation of Islam, meanwhile, survived a massive schism and is alive to this day, and their impact will never be forgotten.